007 Racing is one of the worst games I've played in my life, and it's also an awful disappointment. Let me take you back. The year is 2001. That's when my dad, in one of his weekend visits, brought with him a used, beat-up original PlayStation, one of the big bulky ones. Two games came with it: Fighting Force, a game that I still think is severely underrated, and the other was 007 Racing. Needless to say, I ran straight to my room and was immediately hooked. With the first 3 levels, that is. Yes, that's how far I made it, at the time and for years after. The difficulty of the game tested my patience for the entirety of my owning of the console, but I always had a fondness for it. It was crucial in the development of my love for the franchise, and for a long time I defended it online against its terrible reputations as one of the worst games, if not the worst, in the series. I wish I could say I was right. "007 Racing is a game that fails at nearly every level. It is EA's third attempt at the franchise, maybe fourth depending on how you count the different versions of The World Is Not Enough, and it took an unexpected turn to being a car combat focused game instead of a shooter, and it is undoubtedly a low point on the run. Not that that is immediately clear. To this day, the intro to the game that masterfully edits several of the clips from the movies is amazing. I can't play the whole thing here for fear of a copyright strike, but let me show you just a piece of it.
You might be Bond. James Bond.
Hot damn. Even now, being more aware of the abysmal critical and fan legacy this game carries, I can't help but get hyped up and expect just about the ultimate Bond experience one could have on a video game just by watching this. That this feeling is short-lived is the understatement of the century. As soon as this game starts, one is met with one of the ugliest graphics in any game I've played so far. It is a mess of unartistic pixels that if you squint, it almost kind of barely resembled the iconic Bond cars. And I've never been one to knock a game down for its graphic if the gameplay is good, but I could barely make out what I was supposed to be looking at. I had to crank up the graphical settings on the emulator to try and have a better sense of the environments and the elements across the game, despite taking a hit on the performance and frame rate. But that made all too clear that the technical deficiencies were not the only problems with the graphics. It is also lacking artistically. Every location is muddy, grey and just plain looking. Nothing stands out positively. Not the environments, the blocky character models, and most damning of all for this game in particular, the cars themselves. That is very disappointing, because the selection of vehicles covers pretty much every Bond era. Of course, the Aston Martin DB5 is here, as is the Lotus from The Spy Who Loved Me, but also every BMW from the Brosnan era, and the Aston Martin Vantage from The Living Daylights is available in multiplayer mode. Pretty much every car from the movies that a fan would love to use is here. It's too bad that they are not actually fun to play. The cars are clunky to control. For the most part, they are floaty and lack weight and precision, which makes it hard to carry out the objectives that require precision, which is most of them really. And when driving at fast speeds, they are needlessly hard to control, which results in a lot of what I can only describe as the cars skating around the levels. A lot of the expected weapons can be outfitted, typical missiles, machine guns and lasers you can find on any car game with combat elements, as well as more Bond specific stuff like the back shield from the Aston Martin, the smoke screens and oil slicks. But since this game can give you something nice without making it awful, only one item can be equipped at a time, and they are automatically switched when a new one is picked up. This leads to problems like whenever you are positioning yourself to use a specific item and you accidentally run over a new weapon or accidentally waste ammo because you picked up a new item as you were already shooting. Not to mention that some of them are downright useless. The aforementioned oil slick and smoke screens do basically nothing. By this point, the fact that this is not a racing game despite the name is a thing of infamy with Bond fans. This is more of a vehicle mission game, in the vein of the Driver series. No doubt this is a great idea considering how many of the movies feature action-packed car chases. But A, who in the marketing department thought it'd be a good idea to call it this? And B, why not use those famous set pieces to build the missions in the game? Developer EU Technics decided to instead go for an original story that links all the different missions. It is appropriately Bondian in that it's unnecessarily hard to follow, has a megalomaniac villain who's trying to destroy the world with a virus, and it's overall just an excuse to travel to different locations around the world, from the Mexican jungle to New York and Eastern Europe. There's only about 4 minutes total of cutscenes, so most of the story is delivered via pages of text hidden in a sub-menu before every mission. For most of my playthrough, I didn't even realize those texts were there until I accidentally discovered them when randomly pressing the D-pad. So of course, before I realized they existed, I entered each mission with little to no context of the overall plot. It is serviceable, but works most as fanfiction that tries to squeeze as many references to the movies as possible, including famous characters like Xenia Onatopp, Jaws, and Valentin Sukovsky, and deep cuts like Whisper from Live and Let Die, and Jack Wade from GoldenEye.
Your real talent lies elsewhere, Mr. Bond.
One rises to meet a challenge.
None of the characters are voiced by their original actors, and despite their photos being used across loading screens all over the game, their in-game models bear no resemblance to the actors that play them. The one big exception being John Cleese, who is again back to voice R. I know it's a joke between the Pythons that they only reunited in 2014 to pay off John Cleese's divorce bills, but I'm starting to think that's true. This man is a legend, yet never stops showing up on these terrible games, and considering the caliber of actors that they got for the other roles, the pay cannot possibly have been that good. The poor man needed every penny, that much is clear.
Don't even think about using the car as a battering ram, 007. Pick up some ammunition, for heaven's sake.
In fact, during the course of the game, one can definitely come to hate him. He is constantly commenting on the proceedings, sometimes repeating lines unnecessarily, and in the middle of tense moments when you're fighting with the controllers as much as the enemies, to make innocuous comments that end up being distracting and irritating.
Do be careful, 007, that paint is incredibly hard to find. For the sake of the car, 007, return fire. You need to use your rockets, 007. Careful, 007, you're not invulnerable and neither is that vehicle. Please mind the finish, 007, you know what birds can do.
It doesn't help that the music stops dead on its tracks to let these voice clips play, and immediately cuts back in a very unelegant way.
You'll note, 007, that the Stinger missile is the only way to neutralize airborne attacks.
Watch out!
This type of clunkiness rears its ugly face from the very beginning. But what is not immediately clear is just how difficult this game can get. After the first level, which is a short mission to get the players acclimatized with the controls and the never-ending interruptions from the side characters, we are sent to New York to one of the many levels where the aim is to pick up several items before the time runs out. In fact, the only racing we'll be doing in this game is against time. This is the very first time that the controls really got the better of me, frustratingly crashing, missing the items, and getting killed in the process. Though I was surprised to realize that after all this time, I still remembered the route I needed to take to pick up each item. The third level is an arena-type combat mission where we have to destroy other vehicles as they attack Bond. And this is where the fact that this game has no balance whatsoever is abundantly clear. The amount of damage your car gets from every little touch, be it from the enemies or you accidentally hitting something, is brutal. And since there's no automatic aiming, lining up the shots against enemies who are constantly moving requires a considerable amount of patience. But those are not the only obstacles you meet, not by a long shot. Perhaps the most frustrating of all is the damage you take from your own weapons. The blowback from missiles or mines affects you even if you are considerably far, when in moments when I was very short on health cost me a life, which of course meant I had to restart from the beginning. A frustrating prospect considering there are no checkpoints in the levels. Sometimes the game actually requires you to take damage, as it tells you to destroy certain objectives that can only be destroyed from close range. If you didn't plan every single health pickup beforehand, then trying to complete these objectives will most definitely end up with Bond dying and going back to the start. As I played, I kept asking myself, why would they do this? What kind of design decision is this? Poor mission design choices are seen throughout the whole thing. In the Mexico level, you are required to chase Xenia Onatop, who for some reason is driving her red Ferrari from GoldenEye despite being in the middle of the jungle. But I digress. The chase takes place on a dirt road where it's almost impossible to control the car. It feels even more weightless and slippery than in other levels. In Louisiana, you have to avoid a barrage of rockets being shot by Jaws before using an incredibly slow scoping weapon to shoot him. The penultimate level requires you to pick up very easy to miss items on your way out of the exploding enemy base. They all work on a basis of zero margin of error. If you take a wrong turn, crash, grab the wrong item, or took a second longer than you should have to complete one of the objectives, you are a shit out of luck and might as well just restart the whole thing. This is most egregious of all in the final mission, which has you very awkwardly damaging the engines of the enemy plane before it takes off, all the while taking massive amounts of damage yourself. When you eventually are able to stop it, you are basically one hit away from being killed, and the damn thing rushes against you incredibly fast, leaving a split-second reaction time to get out of its way. And if that wasn't enough, then you have to drive all the way across the track with just enough time on the clock for you to make it out of the stage before it explodes. It's the most bafflingly designed and frustrating mission of the bunch, a perfect summary of the entire awful experience. Perhaps the only interesting mission of the bunch is the one where you are able to control the car from the point of view of several security cameras. A great idea that, like the rest of the game, is badly executed, as the direction of the movement changes depending on which camera it's being viewed from. And there's nothing distinguishable enough in the level to really know where you are in relation to the rest of the cameras. It's very disorienting, and ends up as a failed experiment, sadly. In the start of one of the levels, M tells Bond, and I quote, "Timing and precision will be imperative to your success," which would have been hilariously ironic if I wasn't so pissed off with the game by that point. Timing is never on your side, and the controls don't provide the precision that the objectives require out of you. In fact, this game is actively playing against you most of the time. Like I said, there's simply no margin of error afforded to you, which creates some genuinely tense moments, but at the expense of the player's patience.
My goodness, 007. Show some respect for the car. Get moving.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the multiplayer, which throws two people together in a selection of levels from the game, plus a few taken from the movies, like Fort Knox from Goldfinger, in a 1v1 battle or a pass the bomb mode. But obviously they suffer from the same issues as a single player adventure, and the stages are so large that most of the time is spent finding your opponent instead of actively engaging in battle.
There are several of you 00 agents, but there's only one of those vehicles I needed back in pristine order.
I don't usually dwell too much on music, but I wanted to take a minute to mention it here because the work itself is spectacular. The menu music in particular is a lo-fi style mix of the Bond theme that I have found myself going back to listen a few times since playing. And this is true for most of the other tracks. They are excellent throughout, though a few of them stand out because they don't feel like they belong to a Bond game. I actually found myself thinking, this feels like Need for Speed music a few times, and lo and behold, a little research turned out that a couple of the tracks are remix versions of ones from Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, a game from earlier that same year. But overall, the music is definitely the highlight of the game. In a 2021 interview for Why Now Gaming, lead programmer Peter Davies mentioned,
"Given the huge differences in the game style, it was a massive overhaul of the engine of our previous game, Le Mans 24 Hours. But some core components like the physics engine, renderer, and build tools were retained."
So I went back and played some of that game, and what I found was a competently made product that doesn't suffer from the same issues this one does. So while the reputation of Technics as a studio took a battering from the release of their worst game of all time contender, Ride to Hell Retribution, a decade and change later, I'm inclined to believe that the problems of this game come from a rushed development imposed by EA that ended up with a clearly unfinished product that is not for Bond fans, driving fans, or really anyone who enjoys good games. As a side note, I'm baffled by EA's decision to release this within a month of the PS1 version of The World Is Not Enough. According to Video Game Shards, this only sold a little over 500,000 copies. I'm sure being released so close together couldn't have helped.
I'm surprised, James. You never seem to have a problem keeping up in past encounters.
Despite my fondness for the game from way back then, today I have to agree with the critics who have shat on it over the years. In fact, I would take it a step further and call this an unmitigated disaster. It's sad because the ideas are there. Perhaps not the makings of an all-time classic, but enough to deliver a reasonably fun experience. But nothing comes together cohesively. I was so happy when I finished this and realized I'd never have to play this again, because I don't ever want to. But at least I'll always have the memories of those days, a long time ago, when I could pop this in and get lost in the world of James Bond.
Your performance calls for a celebration, Mr. Bond. What do you say we pool our resources?
That's it for this video. Here are a few more James Bond videos for you to watch if you like this. Please like and subscribe and hit the notifications. Comment if you like this or not, and let me know if you want me to check out any other Bond games or any other movie or spy games in general that you think I should play. And I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you so much. Bye.